So, something pretty interesting happened today. We were, checking out the weekly items like we usually do, and what was that? The Guardian's Will has come back to the game for the first time since December of 2018. If you haven't scrolled down yet, I'll let you know. It is May of 2021, so it has been about 2.5 years since this weapon's release, and I am so happy to cover this because, honestly, this is a weapon I had never powered up before. I had it like level 88 as like an obsidian copy because it had this glitch where you could recycle it to shadow shard, and that was a thing we were screwing around with. I never abused it. We were just curious. Plus, you lost a ton of materials in the process, but that was it. That's the most I'd ever looked into the Guardian's Will. I was told it was bad at the very beginning, and to be honest, it might have been, but I'm not so convinced anymore. So I'm not going to focus too much on the numbers here, but I do want to show the calculator. I'll try to link this down below, but this is a good overview of where weapons stack up. The Ravager, by my numbers, is about 380k, but 400,000 is a good number to go with. The Spectral Blade can get all the way up to about the same amount of numbers, depending on whether or not you got the 6 perks going. It's a complicated subject. These are one numbers, but there's a lot of variables. But the Guardian's Will with my loadout is kind of sort of in the middle, or so it would seem. And that is where I wanted to get into how it's not all about the damage per second, because the Guardian's Will actually does quite a bit more damage per swing than most swords do. In fact, it's actually doing a good amount of damage per hit. Now, that could be because I have a couple of damage perks on this. We'll get into the perks later on, but suffice it to say, it kills in not too many swings, and I also re-perked it to have Affliction. Now, again, we'll cover the perks later, but this was a very, very impressive sword, and something that I'm really, really satisfied to show you guys because I actually think it's worth grabbing and leveling up. In fact, I leveled it up twice because I mentioned that Brightcore copy, and I made it Brightcore and then realized it was Brightcore and then recycled it and then started over on a new copy. So a lot of investment went into today's video. Not to mention there's another way to perk this weapon, and then I re-perked it for that way as well. But let's get into the damage loadout right now. So this is obviously how it's performing. You've been seeing gameplay and you can lunge around. That is one of the defining features and something we'll get into later, but it's really solid. I don't know what else to tell you. It's a fast enough swinging sword with a decent damage output per swing, and that brings me to a topic that I kind of wanted to bring up, and that is that damage per second is one thing, like the total damage output you do over time, but there are certain situations where there are breakpoints. For example, all right, these are basic numbers, not based on like the real health of zombies, but say a zombie has 50,000 health, all right, and you've got one weapon that does like 60,000 DPS, and you've got another weapon that does like 100,000 DPS. Well, if that zombie's gonna die in one hit anyway, it doesn't really matter. And I mentioned I have Affliction on this thing, so what I was experiencing was whether or not the DPS stacked up to all the best swords in the game, technically speaking, it performed exactly on par, if not better in some situations. And that is something I really like to draw attention to because I didn't expect this weapon to impress me so much. So, as you can see, it's performing very well, and I want to get into another way to run this thing. Now, I'll spoil the perks on it just so we can talk about it. In fact, let me go to my inventory so I can actually pull it up for you guys. I didn't have it ready. I am running on this movement speed loadout, double movement speed and heavy attack efficiency. Now, I also did swap my loadout. I can talk about it a little bit. This is just my regular loadout that I use on everything. For the rest of the gameplay with the damage build, you will be seeing a Whiteout Fiona build with crit rating on the sword. But for this one, I ran, what is her name? Forged Fate for the sword heavy attack efficiency so that you could zip around the map a lot. And of course, because I'm running a ninja, you can actually double jump to get a really good amount of height and use that heavy attack to lunge way forward. Now, there are people like me who are kind of, triple movement speed Baron master race people. However, if you are interested in a technically faster but kind of wonky method of lunging forward with the Guardian's Will, that can get you across the map in a pretty efficient way. And it's not something I think I'll be switching over to, but it's something to consider and definitely something that exists and is now accessible to the big crowd of people, at least for the next week, because this weapon is finally back into the game. And I can definitely tell you for free that double movement speed and heavy attack efficiency works if you are interested in having an alternative to the Baron. Perhaps you are somebody who never actually got a copy of the Baron and never found somebody to drop you one. The Guardian's Will is a perfectly adequate replacement, even if you're not using the heavy attack, because double movement speed is really nice. And that actually moves me into the rest of the perks. So let's get into how to perk this thing and why you have a ton of customizability. Now, first and foremost, I can compare this to my Ravager to further complete my point, where it's actually doing more damage per hit than the Ravager, even as a 144 copy. But you'll notice that my Ravager is having having no damage perks on it, only with a crit damage, but the Guardian's Will has 2, and that's kind of the option you have here. In fact, I wanted to mention, if you wanted to go for a combo deal, you could actually do away with the damage, trusting on Paleoluna to give you most of the output, and you could actually put double movement speed and double attack speed to have a hybrid build where you're moving very fast, normally and in combat, and you're also doing tons of damage because of the attack speed. That's not something that I'd 100% recommend. You don't need it, but it is something that's definitely on the table and something you might want to consider. You could even put on the heavy attack efficiency if you're interested in spamming that. And then, of course, the 6th perk. Yes, indeed, I did spend a core reperk to give this thing Affliction, and I do not regret it. Hitting an enemy to grant armor can be nice. It's kind of one of the things that came along with the medieval weapons, granting you armor and allowing you to regenerate your shield. However, the shield regeneration is quite useless if you're using Blast from the Past, because you don't have a shield, so it's completely wasted if you have that perk. And in my personal opinion, Snare is not that important on a melee. In fact, you are right up in the enemy's face, you're right next to them, you don't need them to be any slower because they are right where you need them to be. Affliction is the best in my opinion because of a few reasons. First and foremost, it allows you to afflict multiple enemies at once, which means you can tag an enemy, switch on to another target, and you can essentially be chipping away at an entire crowd of zombies just because of that affliction doing that damage over time. And the fact that Affliction got buffed quite a few updates ago to the point where I don't even think this is a glitch anymore, it just does a ton of damage. Affliction does a super healthy amount of damage. You could probably tag a Husky Husk once and it would probably die from the Affliction damage alone. It's that powerful of an ability, and I would go as far as to say, damage-wise, Affliction is the best 6 perk in the game. Now, it depends on the weapon that you're using. I'm not saying it's best all the time, but in this case, I really think it made the difference, and that is why I definitely recommend it. Now, if you're not using Paleoluna, where you're getting all of your damage from her bonus and you're just exploiting the attack speed, you can run crit rate and crit damage on this, and that is a super good way to go. If you're not running Paleoluna, you could even run double crit damage if you're running a totally rockin' out build, and both of those options are viable with the double movement speed perks on this. I do think damage helps a lot here, but like I said, Paleoluna does benefit most from the attack speed, so a little bit of extra damage is nice to have. There's a lot of variability here, and I don't really think you can go wrong with the Guardian's Will. So, is it the best sword in the entire game? No, of course not. There are some fantastic options. The Ravager is extremely powerful. Is it definitely something you can pull out of the shop and have a good time with right now? Yes. Not to mention, you can have every single element on this thing, which, conceivably speaking, essentially gives it like a 25% damage bonus over any weapon that's locked to energy, because if you can match the element, for example, using fire against nature enemies, you will do 100% of the weapon's damage instead of energy, which normally does 75% to all the different elements. That means that this weapon will always have an advantage against the correct elemental matchups and can give you quite a bit of extra damage. And that's actually one of the ways that Epic sort of passively nerfed every single mythic weapon by locking it to physical and energy. So it's something to consider. Will that make it strictly better than the Ravager? No. Will it make it definitely better than most other swords? Yes. The Guardian's Will is not a sleeper pick. I'm not even going to say it's an average one. I honestly recommend leveling this thing up. That just about wraps it up for the Guardian's Will. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. Subscribe to the channel. I did make this video in the middle of a live stream, so, check out the Twitch link down below. You guys might be able to tune in for some of those. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. And then...